A mail-order bride collapsed in the snow, her strength fading fast, until a stranger's fire drew her back to life and hope. But will his hearth be only her refuge, or the forever home her heart has been searching for? The wind howled through the empty Montana valley, a wild cry that drove snow into every hollow and fold of the land. Eveline Hartwell stumbled forward, skirts heavy with ice, boots sinking deep into drifts. Her breath came ragged, each exhale a puff of white against the endless storm. The stagecoach had left her miles back, its driver muttering about impassable roads before urging his horses onward without her. She had clutched her carpetbag, determined to find Ash Creek on foot, but determination alone was no match for winter. Her vision blurred. The mountains seemed to tilt, and her gloved fingers no longer obeyed her. Eveline pressed on, repeating silently the words that had carried her across half the country. A new beginning. A husband waiting. A home of my own. Her strength gave out. She collapsed into the drift, the carpetbag slipping from her numb hand. Snowflakes stung her face, and the world dimmed to silence. Calder Reed spotted her only because his horse snorted and veered toward the rise. From the ridge above his cabin, he made out the dark figure sprawled in the snow, half buried, unmoving. He cursed under his breath, spurred the gelding forward, and dismounted beside her. She was small, finer than the usual settlers, her dress torn at the hem from walking miles through brush. Her lips were blue, her eyelids fluttering. Calder knelt, brushing the snow from her cheek. "Damn fool," he muttered. Though his hands were gentle, he lifted her, light as a child, and slung her across the saddle. His horse protested the added weight, but carried both steadily down the trail toward the lonely cabin tucked against the pines. Inside, warmth fought back the cold. Calder laid her near the fire, stripped off her sodden boots, and wrapped her in heavy quilts. He set water to boil, all the while glancing at the stranger he had brought into his refuge. Her hair, freed from a damp bonnet, fell in rich chestnut waves. Her face, pale from the cold, held an unmistakable refinement, nothing like the rough women of Ash Creek. When she stirred, her eyes opened slowly, green flecked with gold. She whispered, voice cracked but clear, "Am I in Ash Creek?" "You're not there yet," Calder said gruffly. "You'd be dead if you tried for it tonight." She blinked, confusion flickering before she closed her eyes again. Calder sat back on his heels, uneasy. He had not asked for company, much less some stranded woman with the look of desperation still clinging to her features. He had built his life on solitude, his ranch running just fine without interference. And yet, something about her fragility stirred a feeling he thought long buried. Outside, the storm raged on, sealing them inside together. If you think being rescued was fate enough, wait until you see what this stranger's fire awakens in her heart and his. The storm battered the windows long into the night, rattling the shutters and moaning through the chimney. Eveline Hartwell drifted in and out of restless dreams, her body torn between the bone-deep chill of the snow and the warmth seeping back into her limbs by the fire. When she woke fully, the cabin came into focus. Rough-hewn logs made up the walls, their seams chinked with mud and straw. The place was spare but solid. A sturdy table, a pair of chairs, shelves lined with tools and tinware. A pot simmered over the flames, the smell of broth rising to meet her. Her rescuer sat nearby, sharpening a hunting knife. He glanced up when she stirred. His eyes, a stormy gray like the sky outside, lingered on her for a moment before dropping back to his work. "You're awake," he said flatly. Eveline shifted under the quilt. Her throat felt raw, but she managed a nod. "I thank you. You saved my life." "Didn't do it for thanks. No sense letting someone freeze on my doorstep." His tone was gruff, but his actions belied the words. He poured broth into a cup and handed it to her. Her hands shook as she took it, the steam warming her face. The first sip brought tears to her eyes, so great was the relief. She had not eaten since dawn the day before. "My name is Eveline Hartwell. I was bound for Ash Creek. My husband-to-be is expecting me." Something flickered in his expression at that, though it passed quickly. "Calder Reed," he said at last. "This is my land. Ash Creek's another half-day's ride when the weather allows." The name felt solid, unyielding, much like the man himself. He looked to be in his early 30s, shoulders broad, movements efficient and economical. His dark hair curled slightly at the collar, untamed from the hat he'd worn. There was no ring on his hand, no trace of another presence in the cabin. Eveline wrapped the quilt tighter. "I feared I would never make it. The coach left me, said the road was impassable. I thought I could walk the rest." "You thought wrong," Calder replied, though not unkindly. "This country doesn't forgive mistakes." She lowered her gaze, ashamed. Back in Boston, she had been praised for determination. Out here, it was folly. Yet she lifted her chin again, unwilling to show weakness before this stranger. "I had no choice. My future depends on reaching Ash Creek." He studied her for a long while, as though weighing the truth of her words. At last he leaned back in his chair, arms folded. "Then you'll stay here till the storm breaks. After that, I'll see you as far as town." It was not an offer, it was a decision, spoken with the authority of a man used to command. Eveline bristled but swallowed her protest. The warmth of his cabin was the only thing standing between her and death. She sipped more broth, her eyes drawn to the fire. Yet even as her body thawed, a chill lingered inside her. She was in the care of a man she did not know, a man who seemed to prefer silence to kindness. Still, she could not ignore the strange comfort of his presence, the steadiness in his gaze, the certainty in his voice. For the first time since leaving home, Eveline wondered if survival might not only be possible, but that perhaps fate had led her exactly where she was meant to be. By morning, the storm had softened into a gray hush. Snow lay heavy on the pines outside, glistening like glass in the weak dawn light. Eveline rose stiffly from the cot Calder had prepared, her body sore from both the cold and the unfamiliar bed. Calder was already up, splitting kindling with swift, precise strokes. Each swing of the axe cracked through the quiet, echoing in the cabin like a heartbeat. Eveline watched from the doorway, quilt wrapped around her shoulders, struck by the controlled strength in his movements. He paused, only when he noticed her gaze. "You'll need warmer boots if you expect to get to Ash Creek." Her cheeks flushed. "These were the finest I could afford." "Fine doesn't mean fit for the frontier," he said evenly, stacking the wood. "Out here, practicality keeps you alive." The words stung, though she knew they weren't meant cruelly. Still, a part of her bristled. She had left Boston behind, with its drawing rooms and polite society, determined to prove she could endure what the West demanded. To be reminded of her inadequacy by a man who spoke little and revealed less pricked her pride. She tightened the quilt and stepped inside. "If I'm to stay until the road clears, I should make myself useful." He raised a brow. "You're a guest. Rest." "I won't be idle," Eveline replied, her voice firmer than she expected. Before he could argue, she moved toward the hearth, tidying the quilts, checking the pot, and smoothing the clutter on the table. Small things, but it gave her purpose. Calder's expression was unreadable. He turned back to his work without further protest. The hours crept by in uneasy silence. Eveline hummed softly as she worked, an old tune her mother used to sing when the world felt too heavy. She did not realize she'd caught Calder's attention until she turned and found him staring. He looked away quickly, setting his jaw, but she had seen it, the flicker of something softer beneath his guarded exterior. "You don't talk much, do you?" she asked gently. "Not much to say. And yet, silence says plenty." She smiled faintly, though his eyes darkened. "Words don't change the weather, don't mend fences, don't bring back what's lost." His tone was flat, but the edge in it warned her away from asking more. She lowered her gaze, suddenly aware of how little she knew about this man who had carried her from death's edge. He was both her protector and her jailer, bound not by chains but by necessity. By nightfall, the silence between them had grown heavy, filled with things unsaid. Eveline sat by the fire, darning a tear in her skirt, while Calder whittled at a piece of wood with that same steady concentration he gave every task. Snow drifted softly against the window panes, the outside world hushed and distant. Within the cabin, warmth and tension mingled like two sides of the same flame, drawing them closer even as they resisted. Eveline knew then that surviving the winter was only part of her trial. The greater challenge would be enduring the company of a man who guarded his heart as fiercely as the mountains guarded their secrets. The storm that had nearly claimed Eveline's life was only the beginning. Winter in the Montana Territory was a relentless adversary, and the days that followed tested both her strength and Calder's patience. Snow pressed heavy on the roof, groaning with each fresh fall. Calder spent his mornings clearing paths, hauling wood, and checking on his stock in the lean-to barn. Eveline, unwilling to remain idle, took it upon herself to keep the cabin orderly. She swept the dirt floor, mended linens, and experimented with the limited stores in his pantry: dried beans, salt pork, coarse flour. Meals were plain but filling, and though Calder rarely commented, she caught him finishing every bite. Yet the silence between them stretched taut. Calder spoke only when necessary, his words clipped, his eyes often on the fire or his work rather than on her. Eveline told herself she was grateful after all. She had come west for a new husband, not to linger in the company of a man who made his solitude into armor. Still, in the stillness of the long evenings, she found herself watching him, curious about the grief that seemed to shadow him like an ever-present ghost. One afternoon, as she stood at the window sewing, she noticed Calder struggling with a broken fence post in the yard. The wind bit hard, snow whipping around him, yet he pressed on. Eveline dropped her work and hurried outside, skirts dragging through the drift. "Let me help," she called over the gale. He shot her a sharp look. "Go back inside, you'll freeze." But she didn't. She bent, gloved hands gripping the post beside his. Together, they forced it back into the frozen earth. Calder's brows drew tight, more in surprise than anger, and for a moment their breaths rose in unison, mingling white against the cold air. When the post finally held, Eveline's muscles trembled, but triumph warmed her more than the quilt she had left behind. Calder studied her, his expression unreadable, then gave the smallest nod. Not thanks, not praise, but acknowledgement. That night, when the fire burned low, he surprised her by speaking more than a sentence. Most women from town wouldn't set foot in snow unless forced. You didn't flinch." Eveline met his gaze, steady. "I didn't come all this way to flinch." The words hung between them, sparking something unspoken. As the days rolled on, necessity drew them into a rhythm. Eveline fed chickens and collected eggs, her laughter startling when one hen pecked her skirts. Calder repaired harnesses, his eyes sometimes softening when he caught her humming as she worked. Their lives remained parallel, yet those small intersections, a shared chore, a brief smile, the sound of her voice in the quiet wove threads of connection neither dared name. Winter pressed down hard, but in the cabin at the edge of the pines, two strangers began to discover they were not as alone as they believed. Survival bound them together, but something deeper stirred beneath the frost. The snow held its grip on the valley for weeks. Eveline lost count of the days, though the rhythm of life with Calder gave them a quiet structure. She rose early to stir the fire, cooked what little their stores allowed, and tended to small tasks while Calder worked outdoors. They spoke little, but in those moments when words did pass between them, Eveline felt the weight of silence lessening thread by fragile thread. Still, Calder remained a mystery. She often caught him staring into the flames at night, eyes distant, as though he saw ghosts she could not. Eveline longed to ask, Yet something in his guarded posture warned her away. If she was to demand his truth, she would have to offer her own. The opportunity came one evening as snow fell steady outside, muffling the world beyond the cabin. Calder sat at the table, repairing a leather strap. Eveline folded her mended skirt and set it aside, her hands trembling slightly. "I should tell you why I came," she began, her voice quieter than she intended. Calder looked up briefly, then back to his work. "You said you had a husband waiting in Ash Creek." Her breath caught. "That's only part of it." She clasped her hands in her lap. "I answered an advertisement, a mail-order bride arrangement. His name is Thomas Granger, a rancher. He promised me stability, a place in this new country." Calder's knife paused mid-cut. His expression gave nothing away, but his jaw tightened. "I didn't come out of love," Eveline admitted, shame rising in her throat. "Boston held nothing for me. My parents died, and my brother sold our home to pay his debts. I had no dowry, no prospects. Women without family are easily forgotten in the East." She forced herself to meet his eyes, green against gray. "So I gambled on a stranger's promise. Better to be a wife in Montana than a burden in Boston." Calder set down the strap slowly. "You risked your life for security." His tone was even, but his gaze searched hers, as though weighing the cost of every word. "I risked it for the hope of belonging," she corrected softly. "I thought if I could endure, if I could build something new, perhaps I'd matter again." For a long time, only the crackle of the fire filled the space between them. Then Calder spoke, voice roughened by something she couldn't place. "Belonging doesn't come from an advertisement." Eveline swallowed, uncertain if his words were judgment or warning, but she saw no cruelty in his eyes, only a grief she didn't yet understand. She rose, moving toward the window. Snow fell like a curtain, cloaking the cabin in white. "Perhaps not," she whispered, "but I had nowhere else to turn." When she looked back, Calder was watching her. He didn't speak again, but for the first time, Eveline felt that her confession had shifted something between them. Not acceptance, not yet, but the beginning of understanding. And in this land of ice and silence, even beginnings were precious. The storm finally relented, leaving the world washed in white silence. Calder harnessed his gelding to the sled, his movements brisk, efficient, though Eveline sensed tension in the set of his shoulders. Today, she would finally reach Ash Creek, the place she had nearly died trying to find. Bundled in Calder's spare coat and fur-lined gloves, Eveline climbed onto the sled. The road wound through hills and stands of pine, the snow crunching beneath iron runners. She breathed in the crisp air, her heart hammering with both relief and dread. What awaited her in Ash Creek? A man she had promised herself to sight unseen, or the whispers of townsfolk who would surely wonder how she had come in Calder Reed's company. The town came into view by midday, a cluster of wooden buildings pressed against the frozen landscape, a general store with its porch stacked high with barrels, the blacksmith's forge sending up a plume of smoke, and the church spire standing sentinel over it all. Heads turned as the sled pulled in. Eveline felt the weight of every gaze. Calder tied the reins at the hitching post, his jaw set. He didn't notice or pretended not to the women whispering behind their mittens, or the men lifting brows as they recognized him. "Reed," a voice drawled. Sheriff Hal McKinnon stepped out of the mercantile, arms crossed. His eyes slid past Calder to Eveline. "That new hand you've hired, or something else?" Eveline flushed, but Calder's tone was iron. "She's under my protection until she reaches her intended goal." "Protection," the sheriff repeated, skepticism plain. He tipped his hat to Eveline, though his gaze lingered too long. Ash Creek doesn't often see ladies arrive half-frozen on a rancher's sled. "Folks'll talk." "They can talk," Calder said flatly, leading Eveline inside the store. Inside, warmth and the smell of spices enveloped her. Still, whispers followed. Eveline kept her chin high as she purchased necessities with the few coins she carried: needles, thread, Dried apples? The shopkeeper's wife gave her a polite smile, but Eveline felt the weight of judgment nonetheless. On the ride back, she finally broke the silence. They think I'm yours. Calder's grip on the reins tightened. Let them think what they want. But I'm not, Eveline said, softer now. I came for another. His eyes flicked toward her, shadowed beneath the brim of his hat. And yet you nearly died before reaching him. That man should have been the one to come. Eveline had no reply. The truth cut too close. Thomas Granger had not come, nor sent anyone, though the stage had surely reached town with word of her plight. Snow swirled across the road as they drove on. Eveline hugged Calder's coat tighter around her shoulders, her mind a tangle of questions. The town had judged quickly, and Thomas had not appeared. In the silence of the returning storm, she wondered if she was heading toward the life she had been promised, or the one fate was quietly shaping for her instead. The air grew sharper as February deepened, the kind of cold that cut through wool and leather. Eveline had grown accustomed to the rhythm of Calder's ranch, yet the unease stirred by their visit to Ash Creek lingered. The town's whispers clung to her, and Thomas Granger's absence loomed larger than any storm. One morning, Calder harnessed the team to haul timber from a stand of pines upriver. "Stay close to the sled," he instructed, his tone curt but steady. Eveline bristled at being given orders, yet she followed without protest. Something in the stillness of the woods made her uneasy too. Snow crunched beneath their boots as they worked. Calder swung his axe with precision, dropping pine after pine, while Eveline gathered fallen branches into neat piles. The silence between them was not hostile anymore, but taut, an unspoken awareness that the boundaries of their lives were shifting. The crack of a rifle shattered that silence. The sound echoed through the trees, followed by the thud of a bullet striking the trunk inches from Calder's head. Eveline gasped, stumbling back. Calder's hand went to his revolver as he shoved her behind the sled. "Stay down," he barked, eyes scanning the ridge. Another shot rang out, splintering wood near Eveline's shoulder. Fear surged hot through her veins. She pressed herself low against the snow, heart hammering. A figure emerged between the pines, a man on horseback, lean and hard-eyed, rifle still raised. His hat brim shadowed his face, but his grin was visible even from a distance. "Well, well," the stranger called, his voice carrying. "Didn't expect to see Calder Reed playing nursemaid." Calder stepped forward, gun drawn, steady as stone. "You've got no business here, Mercer." The rider Mercer laughed. "Business is wherever I make it. Heard tell you had yourself a new companion. Thought I'd take a look." His eyes slid toward Eveline, sharp and predatory. Calder's voice hardened. "You'll look, and then you'll ride on." Mercer tilted his rifle. "Or, I'll take what you can't keep." The air between them crackled, cold and deadly. Eveline's breath came fast. She had seen men like Mercer in Boston's alleys, men who lived by cruelty, who took whatever they wanted. But here, far from help, the danger was magnified tenfold. Calder's revolver stayed fixed, unwavering. "You fire that gun again, you won't ride back down this mountain." The standoff stretched, snowflakes drifting lazily between them. Then Mercer spat into the snow, smirked, and yanked his reins. "Another time, Reed." He wheeled his horse, disappearing into the timber as quickly as he'd come. Only when the sound of hoofs faded did Eveline rise from behind the sled, her body trembling. Calder holstered his revolver, jaw tight. "Who was he?" she whispered. "A man who takes what isn't his," Calder said grimly. His gaze met hers, protective and unyielding. "And now he knows you're here." Eveline shivered, not from the cold, but from the certainty that danger had found them. The wilderness had tested her before, but this was different. Mercer was no storm to be endured. He was a choice, a threat that would return, and one that would bind her fate ever tighter to Calder Reed's. The ride back from the timber stand was tense and silent. Eveline sat stiffly in the sled, Calder's revolver resting across his knee as his eyes scanned the tree line. Though Mercer had ridden off, the memory of his smirk clung to her like smoke. By the time they reached the cabin, dusk had fallen, and the cold seemed sharper than ever. Calder unharnessed the team with brisk, restless movements. Eveline busied herself stoking the fire, though her hands trembled as she arranged the logs. When he finally stepped inside, snow clinging to his shoulders, she looked up with a mixture of gratitude and fear. "You've enemies," she said softly. Calder shut the door behind him, his jaw tight. "Everyone out here's got enemies. Some wear badges, some wear smiles. Mercer wears neither." Her heart beat faster at the grim weight of his words. She pulled her shawl closer. "And now he knows about me. About us." He turned sharply, eyes locking on hers. "There is no us." The words cut, though his voice carried more weariness than anger. "You're bound for Ash Creek, for Granger. That's the way it is." Eveline swallowed hard, but instead of shrinking, she stepped toward him. The firelight threw shadows across his face, highlighting the conflict in his storm-gray eyes. "If that's the way of it, then why did you stand against Mercer like that? Why risk yourself?" Calder looked away, shoulders stiff. "Because leaving you to him would have been worse than facing his rifle." Her breath caught. She moved closer, almost without meaning to, until only the fire crackled between them. "You say there's no us," she whispered, "but everything you've done tells me otherwise." Silence stretched. Calder's hands, rough from work, tightened at his sides. She could see the battle in him between the instinct to push her away and the pull that drew him nearer. Finally, he spoke, voice raw. "I buried my wife 5 winters ago. I swore could never open myself to that kind of loss again." Eveline's chest ached. At last, she understood the grief that shadowed him, the silence that weighed more than words. She reached out, her fingers brushing his sleeve. "I didn't come here expecting love, Calder. I only wanted a chance at life. But somehow, in this cabin with you, I've found more than I ever hoped for." His eyes searched hers, pain and longing colliding. Then, slowly, as if afraid of breaking the fragile truth between them, he laid his hand over hers. The warmth of his touch melted the lingering chill of Mercer's threat, thawing something deeper in them both. For the first time, Calder let the silence fall not as a barrier, but as a refuge. Eveline leaned closer, resting her head against his shoulder. They sat by the fire in quiet communion, the storm outside forgotten, the danger beyond their door momentarily held at bay. In that fragile peace, Eveline knew, the walls Calder had built around his heart were beginning to crack, and she was the reason why. The thaw came slowly, but with it came travelers from Ash Creek, men hauling supplies, wagons creaking along the rutted road. It wasn't long before word reached Thomas Granger that his mail-order bride had been found, not in town, but in Calder Reed's cabin. Eveline sensed the reckoning before it arrived. Calder had grown quieter in recent days, as if bracing for a storm, not of snow, but of people. She felt it too, a restlessness in her chest, knowing she had lived in borrowed time. It was near dusk when a knock rattled the cabin door. Calder rose, revolver resting loosely at his side as he opened it. A tall man stepped inside without waiting for welcome. His coat was trimmed in fur, his boots polished, and his eyes sharp with possession. "Eveline Hartwell." His voice was smooth, practiced. "You are my betrothed, and you've been living under another man's roof." Eveline rose, heart pounding. "Mr. Granger?" Thomas's gaze flicked over her, then cut to Calder. "I trusted the post to deliver her. Imagine my shock to learn she was sheltered by you, Reed. Folks in town whisper plenty. Seems you've stolen what's mine." Calder's jaw tightened. "She nearly died in the snow. If I hadn't brought her here, she wouldn't be standing now." "Rescue her, yes," Thomas sneered. "But you kept her. A decent man would have seen her straight to me." Eveline's hands trembled, but she stepped forward. "It wasn't Calder's choice. The storm trapped us. I agreed to come with you, Thomas, but you weren't there. Not when the coach left me. Not when I lay dying in the snow. Calder was. Her words struck like flint, lighting the fire already smoldering in Calder's eyes. He turned to her, surprise flickering at her defense. Thomas, however, only smiled thinly. You think kindness makes a husband material? I promised you land, comfort, a respected place in Ash Creek. Do you mean to throw that aside for a man who hides himself from the world? Eveline's breath caught. The room seemed to tilt, her two futures laid bare. Security in Thomas's house, or the uncertain fragile connection she had found with Calder. Calder's voice broke the silence. It's her choice, Granger. Not yours, not mine. Hers. The firmness in his tone startled Eveline. This man who so often spoke in guarded fragments now gave her freedom with a clarity that pierced her heart. Thomas scowled. Make it then. Now. Eveline lifted her chin. Her voice trembled, but the truth steadied it. I came west to survive, but with Calder, I've learned what it means to live. I cannot be your wife, Thomas. The fury in Granger's eyes burned, but he swallowed it beneath a mask of pride. You'll regret this, he spat, before turning on his heel and storming into the night. When the door closed, silence fell heavy. Eveline turned to Calder, fear and relief mingling in her chest. She had chosen not safety, not certainty, but him. And in his steady gaze, she saw that he had chosen her too. Spring came reluctantly to the valley, the snow shrinking back from the fields, and the first shoots of green pushing through thawing earth. For the first time since Eveline's arrival, the air smelled of promise instead of survival. Life at the cabin shifted with the season. Calder mended fences in the pasture, while Eveline planted herbs in a small patch of soil near the porch. The cabin, once a place of silence and shadows, now echoed with small sounds of life. Her laughter, when the hens followed her skirts, his low voice teaching her how to harness the team, the steady rhythm of two people working side by side. But Eveline knew that spring also meant choice. Thomas Granger had left Ash Creek in anger, but whispers in town hadn't faded. Some said she'd ruined her name, others that Calder Reed had claimed what wasn't his. Still, every time she thought of leaving, her heart clenched. Calder hadn't asked her to stay, but his steady presence spoke more than words ever could. One evening, as the sun dipped gold behind the pines, Eveline found Calder on the porch, sharpening his axe. She wiped her hands on her apron, hesitating before stepping closer. I keep thinking about that day in town, she said softly. About how everyone looked at me, at us. Calder's gaze stayed on the blade. People will talk no matter what. You can't live by their say-so. She studied him. The hard lines of his face softened by dusk. And what about you? You've lived by no one's say-so but your own for years. Do you truly want me here, Calder? Or am I only a burden you can't quite send away? At that, he set the axe aside and met her eyes. Eveline. Her name sounded rough and careful on his tongue. The day I found you in the snow, I told myself it was a chance. But since then, he drew a breath, as though dragging words from deep inside. Since then, this place doesn't feel empty anymore. You've given me something I thought I buried with my wife, a reason to hope. Her heart tightened, tears pricking her eyes. Then let me stay. Not because I have nowhere else, but because here beside you is where I belong. Calder rose, his hand finding hers. It was calloused and warm, steady as the earth itself. He drew her close, not with urgency, but with certainty, as though the moment had been waiting for them both. I can't promise you an easy life, he murmured, but I can promise you won't face it alone. Eveline's voice trembled with joy. That's all I've ever wanted. The last of the sun dipped behind the ridge, leaving them bathed in firelight spilling from the cabin windows. The storm that had once trapped Eveline now felt like a blessing, a force that had driven her to the man fate had chosen for her. Together they stepped inside. not as strangers bound by circumstance, but as partners, beginning a life that was wholly their own. Eveline Hartwell had come west, seeking survival. What she found in Calder Reed's arms was home. If you thought Eveline's journey was powerful, just wait until you discover the next tale of love, survival, and destiny waiting beyond the frontier.